This is a old electric kiln I got on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace, I don't remember. But I gutted it. I took out all the electrical stuff and basically like built a chimney on the inside. Cut a hole on the side over here, and this is where I put a propane burner into that hole. So there's like a flame blasting up on the sides, and I'll just plant this here for like, you know, 8 hours or so, 8 to 10 hours. So what I was saying earlier about the reason I fire most of my stuff at the community studio is because here when I fire, it takes like 8 to 10 hours of like switching the gas here up just like a tiny little bit every like 15 minutes. It's definitely a labor of love. I'm learning a lot by like, this is how people have done it for thousands and thousands of years. I'm gonna cut this here controls like the airflow. So if I chop off the airflow, you'll get a really beautiful orange flame coming up. So you see, flame comes up on that side, wraps up, hits the top of the kiln, goes back down to the bottom of the kiln, through a chimney, or the flue down there, and up through the chimney. Use like some pasta bowls that I've been making. This is why I was saying like stable. These have a very like wide foot. They're very stable, very utilitarian. But then I'll get started. Like I'll think maybe I need like 2 pounds for that. I'll weigh out like 10 pounds or 10 balls of 2 pounds of clay. And then I'll start making. I'll make something. I'll see how far I can get with that amount of clay, because that's obviously a limitation. You can only make a pot so thin, especially when you're thinking about utilitarian. But anyway, then I'll use a gauge, a throwing gauge, to kind of point to a place on the wheel here. Like, imagine I'm making something on the wheel here. I'm just gonna pull the wall up to this pointer. Each time I can put this pointer up, take the pot off, next ball of clay, put the pointer back down, throw the wall to that pointer. It'll be the same. Here's some like jars I'm making, same idea. Start with the same amount of clay. Yeah, I wanted something super round when I was making these, like with one single curve, a belly right at about 50%. But they're all a little different, you know, all a little different. Handmade. Every time I make pots, you know, some of the clay gets shaved off during the trimming process, and all those trimmings go into like this bucket over here, and then I'll slake it down with water, and then like later today I need to do this, mix that up, and then slop it all out onto this plaster to dry, and then I can wedge it up into new clay. These are test tiles. Like I said, my kiln in the front is like a work in progress, and I'm always testing new things. These, instead of like risking a pot, I could just make a tile like this, dip it into the glaze and test my glazes like that. But I put things on these, like these marks, so I can see how the glaze like reacts on a line like that. I put my stamp so I know like, is the glaze gonna hide my stamp or bring it out or anything. People approach pottery in different ways, you know. Some people are like, oh, I'm just letting the clay speak through me, I'll just make whatever the clay wants to be, right? And that's cool, that's pretty, but that's not the way I think of things. There's always going to be a little bit of human error, really, but you can call that magic. Those were stamped, so I threw them all like this, stamped them, and then curled them back up. But these are, I'm making little, I'm thinking of those as business cards, and I'm going to just drop them into like orders. I prefer softer clay, it's easier on the body. Stiff clay really strains the wrists. So I'm really homogenizing the clay mostly. I don't want any inconsistencies, I don't want any air bubbles, hard spots, soft spots, I don't want any of that. So I'm just like running the clay in a spiral motion, mixing it up. And by the time I'm done with this, it'll be all nice and even. But there I like splayed it out into a spiral, and I rolled it all the way back up, so I'm going to end with a nice, consistent shape there. It'll be easy to center on the wheel, hopefully. Let me see. Nice and smooth. Just gonna ball those up and put it back together. You stay relatively clean. You never have to do a big clean. Right. I like to keep my left foot up to square my hips. Again, thinking about the body. I spend a lot of time like this. Gotta square those hips. This is called slap centering. It's a good way to get your clay closer to where it needs to be before getting your hands all wet. Introduce some water. I'm gonna start centering. For a big lump of clay like this, I'm not gonna, you see people coning up the clay into a big cone. I'm not gonna do too much coning, but I'll bring up the clay a little bit. I don't want to cone it up too much just because it's stiff and I don't want to hurt my hands or my wrists. But this is the whole point of coning up and centering down is to mix the clay. It's kind of like wedging. Same idea. So that's centering down, and then I'm going to cone up one more time. With the stiff clay, I'm kind of introducing some water to the clay too, loosening it up. That's mostly there. I have this mirror set up, but I need to adjust it a little bit. It's like a nice way to see the profile of the pot without like leaning back. Making the hole there. Since this is going to be a lamp base, I'm just going to go all the way to the floor, or all the way to the bat beneath it, so I'm just putting a hole in the bottom of the cylinder. Once I get there, I'm going to stretch that out. So I've got a nice open hole in the bottom of my pot that'll make wiring the lamp a lot easier. Okay, made our floor. I'm going to start pulling up the clay, getting some height. Make sure it's nice and slippery. Press the rim. All this slip that comes off can be used. Put it to work. I'm going to collar it to get taller. And every time I'm getting height, I'm going to compress that rim. Rim of the pot's really holding together the rest of the form. Okay. Got some height, we're going to go for some more. I like to weigh my clay so I know like what my goal is, or how much pot I can get out of the clay. If I didn't know how much clay this was, it'd be tougher to know how big of a pot I could make. pressing that rim. Collar. Open this up so my arm fits in there. Pull to there. Finish with a collar. I need to leave the rim here pretty thick. Just thinking ahead, because I'm going to make a little narrow top, and it's going to need to be this wide to fit my arm in there. So I gotta save the clay there till the end. We'll fold that out. So now we're really going to start to get some shape going. Give this thing a belly. Up, a little bit out. Clay has memory where it's like, if it spends a lot of time in one position, it'll want to go back to that position once you fire it, or as it dries. So I'm constantly reminding this thing to go back in at the top. As it gets thinner, I'm going to slow down the speed so I can be a little more controlled. Like, I wish this was it, like making pots, but, well, maybe I don't, but there's so many other parts of the process. This is such a small part of like what I spend my time doing, making pots. It's definitely the most fun though. So now I'm going to really smooth out the surface. I'm compressing the clay between my finger and this semi-hard plastic rib. Just going to make the walls of my pot a lot stronger. I still have quite a bit of thickness in there, which is good because I'm going to balloon this thing out quite a bit. Get it pretty round, but nice and slow so that I don't lose too much height as I'm doing that. Gotta be careful not to widen this part out too much because I'm gonna bring that into like a very narrow neck. Alright, I'm gonna introduce a rib on the inside. So now I'm getting even more compression of the clay. So as the clay gets super thin, well, not super thin, but thinner and thinner, I'm not able to push as hard, so I'm making very fine adjustments to the shape. Now I'll just trim off the bottom here and call this thing good. Boom. There we go. So then in a couple days, well, probably like maybe even later today, I'll trim this up just because it's so hot and dry today. But typically it would take like 2 days for it to get to the next stage, leather hard, where we trim it. I'd trim it. Pretty good. Happy with it. That's a nice size for 6 pounds too. Little bit of a wobble, but no one's gonna notice, right? Once it's on a shelf. Usually on my necks, I'll do some sort of flare like that, so like a trumpet, you know? And on this one, I was coming in pretty narrow here, and I knew I didn't want the neck to be that narrow. So I knew I had to kick it back out up here. So originally I was just doing this little section as a flare out, and I was gonna leave this to be like a uniform curve from the rest of the body. But yeah, with the tool I ended up making that line there, and I'm like, okay, that's a pretty nice line. So I made it a little more intentional looking. So yeah, there's a little bit of collaboration between me and the material for sure. But I mean, you can't help that with clay. It's gonna speak its mind. Like typically you flip pots over and trim the bottom, but like I can't put that up on its neck. So you make a chuck, which is this like hourglass thing where the pot will then sit in there upside down, so that I can trim the bottom. This is one of my favorite pieces ever. There's something, like I make pottery, I make mostly functional pottery, pots that are going to be held or like touched to your lips, right? Pretty intimate things. This is like a flower vase, right? But it's got such an expressive and comfortable handle. I find that kind of funny. And the surface just reminds me of the beach. It's like sandy with a little bit of like water running through it. I don't know. I really like this piece. All the lines kind of make sense with one another. That's what we call an ash glaze. So as it melts, this is a similar glaze. It runs in what we call rivulets, but it just melts like that. It's really cool. This is another collaborative piece I did with someone who also works at the studio where I work at, but he did all this carving, and I think it turned out amazing. I threw it and I glazed it, but he did all this carving that looks like a topographic map, you know? Maybe of the ocean, and these are like islands. Maybe they're clouds, I don't know. I think this one turned out really nice. But I'm definitely inspired by like the water, the coastline, sand, all that stuff. This one can almost be thought of like a cup and saucer, but like maybe like next to your couch, right? Where you're gonna have like a little table for your drink. This is the table and the cup in one. And I don't know, you can store your umbrella in there or something. Or maybe while you're drinking, right? It's not a very good pouring lip, but more of a conceptual piece anyway. I've done one really good commission where I made probably over 400 pots for them, for a restaurant that opened here in town. But since then, I mean, I've just been making a lot of work for my own company, my own brand, Isaih Pottery. Yeah, again, small stuff mostly. And I'm selling at markets, you know. where small stuff is really what people show up to markets to buy. No one's, you know, wandering on by and buying like a big old vase, a big old jar. Hey, so thanks for coming along and checking out my studio and learning a little bit more about my process. If you want to see even more, you can check me out on Instagram or check out my work at isaih.xyz. So if you want to book a class with me, head on over to Sculpd, the events page, and sign up through there.